Welcome to a special edition of Night Shift here. Eric Lopez alongside Bryson Turner. We're going to break down the 2024 UCF Athletic Hall of Fame class, which is out on Tuesday. Read all about it on our blackandgoldbanneret.com article. Thank you very much for that. Coming up, we'll break down each member. We'll also look ahead who could be some contenders for next year and beyond. So, of course, you can check us out at blackandgoldbanneret.com. Check us out here on the YouTube channel. Check us out on the podcast feed as well. All right, Bryson, let's get to it. Member of 6 this year in the class of 2024. The headliners, of course, Shaquem Griffin from football, Kirk Spirall, former UCF men's basketball head coach, as well as Chris Duffy, UCF slugging baseball hit player. And, of course, Ashley Holder from UCF women's golf, and Anne-Marie Blaney from cross country and track and field, and then Mark Giacone, running back from football from 87 to 90. You've had some time to digest this Hall of Fame class. Bryson, what jumps out to you?
I think what really jumps out to me is the variance of how long these people have had to wait. For one, you have these first timers that we like to call. Remember, the Hall of Fame eligibility is that you have to wait 7 years after you graduate if you got your degree from UCF, and so this ended up happening for 3 of these inductees this time. Shaquem Griffin, which I think is a pretty valid choice. First member of the 2017 team to be inducted. This is the season that seniors, that people from the 2017 team are eligible. You have Ashley Holder, who I think we would argue she is up there for one of the greatest women's golfers in UCF history. So if there's somebody to put in for the first women's golfer in UCF Athletics Hall of Fame history, she is definitely in that conversation, and this is the first year she's eligible to do so. And then you have Anne-Marie Blaney, who we have said a bunch of times before. She is the most accomplished distance runner in program history. I would argue she is the standard for distance running in program history. So I think if you're going to put any distance runner into the Hall of Fame, she is definitely one of them. She has earned the right to go in immediately, and she went in on her first year of eligibility. Then you have Mark Giacone, who actually is tied with Lou Ciofi for the longest time from their graduation to their induction in UCF Athletics Hall of Fame history for an individual athlete at 34 years, which is a long time. And if you watch the video that UCF Athletics released, where the inductees were informed of their induction, you can see the relief, or just the release that Mark Giacone must have had felt in that moment, because this has been a long time coming for him. The only people that waited longer than Mark Giacone and Lou Ciofi was a team induction when the 1978 national championship winning volleyball team waited 37 years to be inducted in the class of 2015, but that's a full team. So, and then of course you have Kirk Spirall, who recently retired from basketball coaching. He was last at Iowa. And I mean, we've all kind of known the story of how he took a team in 1993 that was among the worst in NCAA men's basketball and managed to usher it into and prepare it for the modern era that we kind of got to know, and kind of welcome the Edition Financial Arena to what it is today. I would argue that while Torchy was the foundational element for UCF basketball, period, I think Kirk Spirall, I would argue, is the foundational element for modern UCF basketball. So he is more than well earned his induction in the Hall of Fame a year after G. McDowell entered, who I think would argue was foundational for the modern UCF football.
All right, let's kind of break them down. Obviously, I think we would agree Shaquem Griffin and Kirk Spirall are going to be the headliners here, right? This is going to be sold out. The event will take place at the Celeste Hotel Friday night, November 1st. Go to ucfnights.com for all the details there if you want to attend, purchase. It's a fun event. I've been to 15, 19, 22. I've been to 4 UCF Athletic Hall of Fame events. It's a blast. So I recommend it, especially if you're a UCF sports fan. Obviously, if you're a football fan, you're a basketball fan, this is going to be a treat. But all of them, it's also fun. They will also be honored at halftime or at some point. I shouldn't say halftime because they change it every year. At some point during the football game against Arizona, Saturday, November 2nd. So it's a fun weekend there. So everybody gets a treat there. Would you agree that Shaquem Griffin and Kirk Spurrell are the headliners for the casual fan that's probably going to be attending this or following this?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, football and men's basketball are obviously
Yeah.
the sports that everybody knows across college athletics. And when you have somebody with the cachet that Kirk Spurrell and Shaquem Griffin have, not just I would argue in UCF history, but national history as well. I mean, you look at Shaquem Griffin. I mean, he was one of like the human interest stories of the 2017 college football season. So I think that the headliner status is well earned. Obviously, football and men's basketball are very held in high regard with Hall of Fame inductions, but I think in this case, both of them have more than earned their place in the Hall of Fame. This isn't like to say we're inducting a football athlete just to induct a football athlete.
No, not at all.
Or we're inducting a men's basketball, figure just because they're a men's basketball figure. Both of them, their resumes have more than earned their recognition by UCF.
Shaquem Griffin, we kind of knew this already back at the football preseason kickoff luncheon, however you want to call it. He was the guest speaker, and then UCF surprised him after he was done with his speech, telling him that he would be inducted into the UCF Athletic Hall of Fame. It's a no-brainer. He's a first ballot. We ranked him 7th in our top 100 greatest UCF male athletes, which we did a while back in 2023. I think you could argue he's the best defensive player in the program's history. He's definitely an ambassador of the program. I wrote a column about it on blackeaglebattery.com, how he's the ambassador of this program in a lot of ways on and off the field throughout his career. Was an American Conference Defensive Player of the Year 2016. Peach Bowl's most outstanding defensive player. No way UCF wins that Peach Bowl without him. That was one of the great performances any UCF football players had at a big stage like that. He was incredible. Second team All-American in 2017. And of course, the story speaks for itself. It's been well documented. So this is this is a no-brainer. So I want to expand here a little bit on this question then. You mentioned it. He is the first person from the 2017 UCF team to get inducted to the UCF Athletic Hall of Fame. There's a belief, I believe, at some point down the road that the 2017 team will get honored possibly to the UCF Athletic Hall of Fame, right? You feel that way. You're not alone in that. People have believed that, whether that's maybe in the 10-year anniversary, 15-year anniversary, 20, whatever. At some point, that whole team will probably get honored. Okay, put that to a side, Bryson. Let me ask you this. How many players do you think from the 2017 team you think will end up in the UCF Athletic Hall of Fame, or at least be in the mix down here moving forward?
Yeah, on their own. On their
own.
Right. So as far as the team goes, obviously the team itself, it has a national championship to its name because of the Colley Matrix. So, but obviously teams are recognized a little bit, or the rules for induction are a little bit different from individuals. So we might have to wait a little longer for that. As for individuals, I think the first one that obviously has to be brought up is Mackenzie Milton. He is coaching at the University of Tennessee, and we have seen from actions of the Hall of Fame committee before that they usually try to induct people that are able to make the trip. And so if Mackenzie Milton is coaching with the University of Tennessee in the year that he is inducted, then either he will need to make time in his schedule, or the UCF Athletics Hall of Fame might wait until he is available in order to do so. Now, I think other than Shaquem Griffin, I think Mackenzie Milton is the biggest name on that team. So there's also the idea that you really shouldn't have to wait for his opportunity, which could be coming very soon. because the last time he played for UCF was in the 2018 season, but he also transferred after 2020. So it's a little
sources have told me he could be eligible as soon as next year. Now, the thing with him, which keep in mind as we do this at this present time, he's coaching. He's on the Tennessee staff with Josh Heupel. So I think with his situation, it's not a question of is he going to get in. He's going to get in. The question is when does he get in, and is he available? I would hate what I think you want to avoid is you want to induct him, but he can't make the ceremony because he's got obligations, right? So I think that's all that's going to have to be sorted out, whether it's next year or beyond that. But I agree. Mackenzie Milton will certainly be at some point in the UCF Athletic Hall of Fame. Could be as early as next year. I think if the logistics work out, it could be next year. If not, it could be whenever, the next few years. But go ahead.
Yeah. I think if you're UCF, if you're the Hall of Fame committee, you want to get him in as soon as possible. I mean, he is worth that. Just like how Shaquem Griffin was worth that. It just worked out that Shaquem Griffin is in a position in his life where he's able to be very flexible with a schedule like this. Speaking of Griffin, his brother Shaquille. So he was drafted in the 2017.
So he's not on the 2017 team. He's not on the 2017.
Well, the thing is though, it's his brother though. It is his brother. I feel like that I'd want to bring. I feel like he's worth bringing up. Do you think
he's not in yet? I mean,
he's a Pro Bowler. He is a Pro Bowler.
He could get in on his NFL career. That would, but maybe that's something they figure out after he's done playing.
All right, let's go ahead and then take a look at the. I want to look at the NFL draft a little bit because I think that's also an indication of the people.
Well, let me give you. Here's some names. I think Traquan Smith.
Drafted.
To me, he's in the conversation for best receiver as far as UCF career only. I mean, I know that the NFL career hasn't really clicked, but who cares? I think he'll be in that mix for Hall of Fame conversation. I think Gabe Davis will be in once his NFL career is done. He was part of that 2017 team. What you think about that? Multiple receivers on that football team. So I think those are two others that jumps out from that 2017 team for sure.
Here's someone else that I think because he's also made it in the NFL. Matthew Wright, kicker, one of the best kickers in program history. The UCF Athletics Hall of Fame has inducted kickers before. Scott Ryerson. So, what do you think? He of course he made it to the NFL. He left a job at Lockheed Martin to do that. So, I mean, he definitely.
He's had some cup of coffee in the NFL back and forth. He hasn't maintained it, but nonetheless, he has kicked in the NFL, has great numbers in his career. Certainly, the kicker situation is interesting. Matt Prater is not in. Will he get in based on his NFL career? To be determined on all that. That could influence the Matthew Wright situation, the thing that he's got going for him. He was part of that 2017 team. I think, that's something that certainly that people somebody may pick up on. We'll see.
All right. There's also
but I don't think he's at the top of the list. I mean, I think the receivers are going to be at the top of the list, and I think the running backs. Let's get to that with Adrian Killings, and I think this is going to be very interesting moving forward. Adrian Killings and the late Otis Anderson.
Yes,
I think will get consideration, and I certainly think have a shot to get into the Hall of Fame. I'm not going to say it's a definite, but I definitely think they have a shot.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Both of them have meant a lot to this UCF program. Heck, Adrian Killens was recently back on campus to do the UCF pregame show with UCF students on Hitting the Field for the Sam Houston game. So he's still around the program at the very least. So I think they're definitely going to be under consideration as well. Somebody who was a freshman, by the way, on that 2017 team that's in the NFL, Richie Grant.
Lock for the Hall of Fame. Was a Jim Thorpe finalist at Defensive Back Award. Absolutely should be in. No doubt. To me right now, he's probably got the heavyweight title belt as the best UCF NFL player currently active, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think so as well. He's, as far as UCF players go, he dominates the NFL. In the NFL, I do agree with you on that. Another player that was in the 2017. You talked about the running backs with Killens with Killins and Otis Anderson, who were dominant in the 2017 season, but who was also on the 2017 roster. Let's not forget the other member of the big three UCF backfield, Greg McCray.
See, I'm not sure he gets in. I don't think all three get in. I just don't. That's a lot. And so the thing that I think will have both Killings and Anderson, remember, had a cup of coffee in the NFL. Both of them had memorable games, memorable moments. Both contributed in more ways than just running the football. They were great receivers, great returners. They made memorable highlight plays. I don't know if McCray gets there, and we'll get to McCray later because I'm going to make a comparison interesting. I'm not saying he won't be brought up because he does have good numbers. Certainly benefited when Josh Heupel took over as head coach. But it is a name worth bringing up. But I don't think he's ahead of Killings. I don't think he's ahead of Anderson. I don't think he's ahead of Traquan Smith. He's not ahead of Gabe Davis from those skill positions. He's not ahead of Richie Grant. I think Richie Grant's a fantastic choice. Keep in mind, Richie Grant will not be eligible for another few years. And my guess would be you wait till his NFL career is done before you induct him.
Speaking of the NFL, another UCF player on that 2017 team that's in the NFL, though I think he would be inducted for his achievements as a UCF Knight, Jordan Akins.
That is very good. That's a good call. Very under the radar, right? Like the guy's quietly had a nice long NFL career. Overcame a very serious injury at UCF. I think that's a very fascinating case. You could argue maybe the best tight end in program history. That's where he's made a living in the NFL. Could be, by the way, starting this weekend in Jacksonville for the Cleveland Browns in the NFL. So that's a sneaky good. You know what? That's a sneaky good name. That's a sneaky good name. And I'll tell you this. Let me ask you this question. Let me put you on the spot because we're going to do this from time to time, folks. We got to make this show interesting. If I put you in the committee, you can only pick one. Jordan Akins, Greg McCray. Who are you putting in?
I think the NFL career puts Akins over the top.
I agree. I agree.
You look at his NFL career, with his career in Houston from 2018 to 2022, he may not have started every game, but he played in 73 games and in every season, bar one. So for 4 of his 5 seasons, he actually averaged double-digit yards per the season.
And by the way, he's been on the NFL roster. It's not like he's been hanging out in the practice squad. It's a valid point. Absolutely.
So
I agree. That's a sneaky good name there that may not jump out to people, but is quietly really done well for himself. That's a really interesting name. That quite frankly, I got to consider as well. Moving forward down the road, if I ever update my top 100 list, I didn't have him on at the time, but you're right, he's really lasted longer than I think some people thought in his NFL career. And for those who are wondering, why does the NFL career matter? One of the categories that UCF, the committees, does look into is they have a category basically where if you have helped UCF post UCF career. In other words, if you've had a great pro career, international career, etc., they will induct you into the Hall of Fame. There are examples of that. Some would argue that Brandon Marshall got in part because of his NFL career. I think that's unfair. His UCF career was good. Obviously, his NFL career was fantastic. But, man, that's a sneaky good name, Bryson. Jordan Akins. That's a good one.
No, yeah, exactly. I think that he's the NFL career, I think, is very important when you think about this. And this is why I think
and I agree with that, by the way. I know some don't. Some think it should just be based on what you did at UCF. But to me, the pro career, that's why a lot of football players, especially, go to UCF, is eventually to go to the NFL. And if you get to the NFL and succeed, that's kind of a tiebreaker, right? If it's between you and another great players we'll get into throughout the show. There's a lot of football players that are certainly worthy of being in the Hall of Fame that are not. Some of the differences could be the NFL career. But interesting. Akins is interesting. That's an interesting name. But let's move. And we'll got to move it. We got 5 other names to go over. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I think the NFL career also really helps out with offensive linemen because there isn't really like statistical ways to measure their involvement as much if unless you look at the success of the running game during their time at UCF. That's why Josh Sitton was in, for instance, which is very well deserved, Super Bowl champion, all of that. One more name I do want to bring up from the 2017 team that I think is a very interesting discussion because there's Marquette Smith who transferred in. We have a transfer that made a big impact for the 2017 team that was selected in the first round of the NFL draft, Mike Hughes.
That one's tough. 1 year. That's tough. That's longevity's missing there.
I feel like the NFL career, though, like if his NFL career pans out well enough, I think that could help him.
Well, it's not panning out right now. He's obviously very important. That's a tricky one. I'm not opposed to it, but I can see others that might be. That's a tricky one. Very tricky. All right, so we got a lot of names from that 2017 team that certainly could be in the conversation and certainly be a candidate to be a future UCF Athletic Hall of Famer, which is good, which makes sense.
Oh, yeah. I think the 2017 team is going to end up being like, it's funny because this 2017 team, with how many people I feel like could get inducted into the Hall of Fame from this team, it almost reminds me of the 1990 team, Eric Lopez, because look how many people from that squad ended up in the UCF Athletics Hall of Fame.
All right, you want to get right into it. Mark Giacome, the starting running back from that 1990 team, is getting inducted this year. Played from 87 to 90. Let's first go ahead and Bryson, explain the Mark Giacome situation, because that is certainly one of the most interesting case of this year's class. I've received a lot of feedback, a lot of questions on it. So I got to go ahead. I give you the platform real quick to kind of address Mark Giacome and his achievements there, which is unique there, and as well as kind of overall standing here, because that's an interesting case there with Mark Giacome. As you mentioned earlier, 34 years?
Yes.
He gets inducted. It's between his induction in 2024 and his last game played in 1990, played in that legendary Youngstown State game in FCS. UCF got to the semi-final.
Yes. So Mark Giacome is a very interesting case. So this is what UCF has in his press release. So he finished second all-time UCF rushing yards in the record books with 2,128 career yards, 22 career rushing touchdowns, which is the top 10 in program history. RJ Harvey recently passed him actually this year as what he's doing. He ended up getting a school record 191 yards during that Youngstown State game, which is absolutely insane because, of course, it led to, I would argue, one of the biggest wins in UCF history that day. And of course, you had the nickname Magnet Man, which I think was a really great one. He came back from a big knee injury as well during the 1988 season and came back in 1989 and ended up earning team MVP that year. But what's interesting is that when you look at the UCF record books for rushing yards in program history in top 10, Mark Giacome is not on it. And I say that because when you look at the total number of yards that is accounted for in UCF's record books, it actually does not match what we would see, say, Isaiah Bowser would. And that is because that back then, during this era, postseason statistics did not count, which means that 191-yard school record game that Giacome did against Youngstown State did not count towards his statistics. And let's also remember that not only was Mark Giacome in the postseason in 1990, but he was also in the postseason in 1987 when the team was in Division II. So you have 2 postseason games in 1987, 3 postseason games in 1990. That is 5 games worth of rushing yards that is not counted towards Giacome's rushing total, including a school record. a school record game. That is a lot, Eric. That is a lot. And so he would end up actually being much higher on the UCF all-time rushing list had these games counted. And so, in my opinion, the games are available, but it seems like they don't retroactively include them when they changed, including postseason statistics when it was changed in the early 2000s. So I ask of you, Eric, I want to get your position on this. What do you think about the issue of retroactively counting postseason statistics for something that happened in that era? Because he did run those yards, and we
He
can't
did.
count.
But here's the tricky thing about this. As you mentioned, back then they did not include the postseason stats with your regular season stats like they do now. In part, and this was something that told me the other day recently, you know, the postseason, when they changed the rules, basically the thinking was, oh, it's bowl games only. Whereas back then, you're talking about multiple playoff games. The interesting thing that I'm fascinated is what's going to happen moving forward now when you have these college football teams that make the college football playoff and may end up playing 3, 4, 5 extra games. The stats are going to be all out of whack. So I don't know. I don't. It's a tricky deal because I don't. He's really the one that's benefited the most, right? That group benefited the most from getting those extra games in the postseason. Now, I agree that I think his single game performance against Youngstown that you brought up is not. It should be highlighted in the record books.
Yeah,
You could
it's
easily,
not.
and it's
And then,
not. But now what you could do is you could do an asterisk, kind of like what Major League Baseball did for many years with Roger Maris when he had the home run record. And he said, hey, Roger Maris hit 61 home runs in 162 games versus Babe Ruth hitting 60 in 154 games. You could do something like that if you are that concerned about it. But I think the reason why that will not happen is I don't think they want to go through every single player in that era and update everybody's single stats, would be my guess. Plus, the weird thing is, this is only a college issue because to some extent, because in the pros, this is not a non-issue. They don't count playoff stats to their career stats, regular season stats. In fact, the NBA has this thing now, the playing game, where the stats don't even count for anything. They don't count for regular season. They don't count for playoffs. It doesn't exist. It's the most bizarre thing ever. So I see both sides to it. Could you see have a little note saying that, hey, he had X amount of yards in the postseason? You could do that, especially now that the college football. I think your best argument would be, hey, look, there's a college football playoff now in the FBS. Excuse me. Let's just hypothetically say that UCF were to make the playoffs, right, this year. Well, RJ Harvey could get up to one to multiple extra playoff games. Why should that count and not Mark Giacombs, right? That's the argument now that you can make from a Mark Giacombs standpoint of why are UCF players moving forward going to have 2, 3, could have up to multiple playoff games, count their stats, but not go back and count. Now, the counter argument would be, well, those are FCS numbers versus FBS. I don't know. I can go either way on that. I don't think UCF will go back and update them. I just don't think they will. I could be proven
I mean,
wrong. But that's not. I don't get a sense that that's something that's on the radar. And again, in the defense of everybody, this was not like a hatchet job, that somebody was out to get the players or whatever. It just was what the rules were back then. And I don't think anybody thought long enough about hey, 30, 40 years from now, this could be important. Kind of like me. Like I bought a lot of VHS tapes. I had a VHS recorder. I had no clue that 20, 30 years, when I started getting VHS collections in the 80s, I didn't think it would be obsolete by 2024. So nobody's thinking that long term.
I mean, my argument is that they should count because they earn the right to be there. And so it's not like
Not by the rules, though. It was by rule. It didn't count towards the regular season.
No, I'm not
So
saying it counts for the regular season, though. What I'm saying is that it's career numbers. It's part of your
right, but they
career.
didn't
You
include
earn a
it
right
back
to
then.
be there.
They didn't include it back then. That
It,
was the rule.
I know that. I'm just saying for retroactively, which
I mean,
like put it this way: if Mark Giacone's postseason stats were counted into the picture, he would actually be ranked 6th all time in UCF rushing yard history right now. That is where RJ Harvey just got to after the Sam Houston game. So he would still be in the top 10 in all-time rushing yards to this day had he not had those stats counted, but he ended up getting pushed out because, in the decades.
so let me ask you this question though. What if there's a ruling, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I'll just play. What if they make a ruling within the next year or two and they say, hey, these playoff stats for the college football playoff will not count towards your career stats for any college football athlete? Then what?
I mean, the decision will have been handed down at that point.
Right. At that point, you can't go back and get Giacomo. And I think that's the other thing. You got to see how this all plays out. Will they count those stats or not? And if they do, I think your argument gets strengthened because you're like, wait a minute, why are you counting these playoff stats to the career stats, but you're not counting the career stats from back then? Why can't you go back and add those? Or at least, right, maybe acknowledge it somewhere in the media.
Like maybe like kind of like how the NFL does it, because the NFL still keeps track of postseason stats. It's just separate, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, correct. Yes, separate category. And so I think that's something that I'm going to monitor. I think we need to monitor this moving forward, is what happens to the college stats now that there's an expanded college football playoff. Will those stats be included? Because that's going to throw everything for a wrench. Look, the NFL currently has a 17-game schedule, which is also affecting the career stats, season stats, records.
Yeah, but the difference is with the
14
NFL,
games versus 16. I think we're going to go to 18 eventually. So it's always a chasing game in that regard.
Well, the difference is, though, with the NFL is that the NFL, that was just how the game was played back then. There was 14 games, and then that was it. Then there was 16 games, and then that was it. But with the college, games were still played. Like, the games exist. We know, we have the stats from them. It's just a matter of, do we include them or not?
I think, again, the answer will lie in what happens with these college football playoffs. I really do. And then, because somebody's going to have to address that. And I think what's going to happen here, Bryson, is somebody's going to realize during the quarterfinals or the semifinals, it's like, oh, wait, these stats, oh my God, they added these stats to this. And then whenever UCF makes the playoff for the first time, I think that's a very legitimate point, because you're going to have to, at that point, make that decision. Are you just including that with the season stats and the career stats or not? Or are you going to do that as a separate category? That will be very interesting. Very interesting. So we'll see.
It's very interesting, but that's a whole other conversation. I think that I do want to reel this back to Mark Giacone himself for a little bit, because it did take him a very long time for him to get inducted into the Hall of Fame. The only individual athlete that had to wait as long as he has was Luciofi, who he played, though, in like the early days of UCF soccer. So the UCF Hall of Fame wasn't even around for him to get in until the 90s, and he played in the late 70s. So he already had to wait a while for the Hall of Fame to even become a thing. But for Mark Giacone, he only had to wait 8 years before the Hall of Fame became a thing. And a lot of his teammates, like Willie English.
Well, yeah. Well, let's get into that. Because this is the one that I've gotten the most questions about. Okay, Bryson, this is the one that's gotten me some questions since it's come out. And let's just emphasize this. I'm cool with him getting in. I don't have an issue with it, especially with this revelation that we found about the numbers. It's valid. Clearly got the support. I think the committee did a fine job this year. It's all that. But I think there are some legitimate questions to be asked here that I think people have been asking about this. Number one, why did it take this long? Especially when there were teammates of his that got in over him. Here's the list from his 87 team, when it was his freshman year. Ed O'Brien got in. Sylvester Bembury got in. Bernard Ford got in. He also was teammates with Sean Jefferson, who's in, Bob Stolsky, Franco Grilla, Rick Hamilton, Willie English, they're all part of that 90 team. Those are some names that got in there into the Hall of Fame. Why did those guys get in, but he didn't? You can't use the excuse of, well, they just didn't look at that team and they looked at those teams and they put in guys over him. And the reason why people have asked me about it is there are some people that believe there's players in the current, the modern era, however you want to call it, let's call it the Division I era, that they feel that there's certain football players on the Division I era, FBS level, that are not in the Hall of Fame, that should be in the Hall of Fame, and that should you be putting somebody in from the FCS over a guy from the FBS, then there's the argument about other UCF sports from that era of athletes that have been overlooked. Will they get that same benefit of doubt that Mark Giacome did? Your response?
I think it is a legitimate question. I think the biggest person that we have to talk about in this manner, because let's look at the top 10 rushing totals in program history. There's a lot of people that aren't eligible for the Hall of Fame yet, like Greg McCrae, Adrian Killens, RJ Harvey, Otis Anderson. Well, Otis Anderson, they're not eligible yet, But Kevin Smith, number one, he's in. You have Marquette Smith. You have Willie English, all in the top 5. But you look at number 2, Alex Haynes. He is not in the Hall of Fame yet, but he is the number 2 rusher in program history. So I think when Mark Giacome coming in, and when you think of people asking questions, I think the questions kind of come from what happened with Alex Haynes, and I think that is the interesting thing. It's not to diminish Mark Giacome, obviously, but when you overlook somebody for as long as it has, then other people could potentially be getting overlooked in the process a little sooner down the line. Now, it is obviously the Hall of Fame only became a thing in 1998, and then they were they were annual for a while, but then they kind of went, every 2 years, and then there was a large gap between 2015 and 2019, then the pandemic happened. So it's not there was that time where if those years did have a Hall of Fame class, there would be a lot more people in the Hall of Fame than there is right now.
But here's the issue. Here's the issue that I have in particular. By the way, I forgot Sean Beckton somehow. He was a teammate as well. Should be in. There was two kickers during this era. Ed O'Brien
and Franco Grilla.
They got it. I'm not suggesting they should. But let me ask you this question, Bryce. Would Matt Prater get in over Kevin Smith in the Hall of Fame?
No. I think it's a matter of NFL.
No, they wouldn't. No, the answer is no.
If you're saying 1-to-1, if you're saying 1v1, yes, it's Kevin Smith. Yeah, if you're saying 1v1, it's Kevin Smith, obviously.
Look at you with the soccer lingo, 1v1. Soccer Coach Calabrese gonna be proud of you. So the reason I bring that up is I find that weird that 2 kickers that he played with got selected over him. Now, one of them was one of the top kickers in the nation. I get it, the stats and all that. I just find that bizarre. Like, why wasn't Mark Giacome, if he was this as iconic, and he was, and look, he has a lot of support. Why was he not picked over some of those other guys that were picked? That's the part that finds me weird. It's not like you could say, hey, we're picking this guy from the 2000s over a guy in the 1980s because we saw this guy play in the to me, and I don't know if anybody has the answer to that. The only people that have the answer to that are people that were in the Hall of Fame class committee back then. So my questions are really.
I would argue most any person that was ever in the Hall of Fame committee would probably
answer, especially back then. And the reason I bring back then is yes, the Hall of Fame didn't start till the late 90s, but people that were selecting those guys from that era probably watched those teams play, which means they watched those players play. And I do think that matters, should matter in your selections. And Mark Giacome was passed over by some of those other guys. That's the thing that's really bizarre to me and perplexing to me a little bit. Not to say that people do get overlooked all the time, but I do find that interesting, Bryson. And that's the word, really, the more appropriate word is interesting, that he was not selected while others on that team, and I don't want to go in through each name and who would I would pick, over there, but that's the part that's fascinating and interesting, that he was not included back then among all those talents. And the reason why it's a topic that's been brought up, you mentioned Alex Haynes. Alex Haynes is not in the Hall of Fame. And some believe that Alex Haynes is being punished unfairly because of the lack of success around him with the team. Obviously, he was part of the UCF team in 2001 his freshman year as independent. They played in the MAC for 3 years. They ended on a winless season. And I think some people have an issue with that. Well, if he was so great, why were they so bad? Well, that's not his fault. He didn't have the talent around him. And I think that's where, is Mark Giacome benefiting from the success of that era? Like, if that team loses in the opening round of the playoff, are we still having this conversation? I don't know. I don't know the answer to this, for the record. Again, I want to emphasize, because I know we live in an era, Bryson, where everything gets taken out of context and aggregated. Yeah. I have no issue with Mark Giacome getting into the Hall of Fame. I'm cool with it. I think we've done the research. In fact, we're the only ones that've done the research when it comes to the numbers.
Okay.
I just think there are some legitimate, interesting questions as a fallout from all this.
No, yeah. This guy came back from a knee injury and was arguably better afterwards than he was before. Sure. I mean, that alone, I think, is worthy of respect. He earned the team MVP award as well. And like, look, when you really think about it, I think that we know that people really like this guy. He's got the nickname Magnet Man. I saw this really old article about him. There was a section of fans in the stands that had a name for him. The name is blanking on me right now, but he did have one, according to old newspaper clipping I ended up finding in my research on Giacome. So it's not that he is not worthy at all. He is absolutely worthy. It's just more of the question of why now. And the stat, I feel like, sure, you do have the people watching, obviously, that were in the Hall of Fame committee, but as time goes on, because that could maybe stop you for maybe like 20 years. But Giacome waited a long time. And late, when you look back from the archives, and because say there's an eras committee or something like that, you're like in Cooperstown. If you look at the 1990s era to say, hey, who do we overlook? And you look at the stats from that time, and that's why I make a big deal about the stats, is that if you look back at the regular season stats and Giacome is not in the top 10, then you kind of overlook him. That's why I overlooked him for so long when I was, looking back, because we didn't realize this about the stat counting for a little while. And when I discovered this and where Giacome would be in the rushing standings had they counted, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, why did I ever think he didn't deserve to be in? And so that's what really just makes me interesting, because I ask about and I bring up the stats like I do, is because because of how it was counted, you could end up overlooking him more, and it ignores stuff that he did.
No, I think that's a fair point. I think from a resume standpoint, it should be mentioned somewhere. Whether you agree or disagree that it should be included in the career stats or retroactive, it's one thing, but it should be mentioned somewhere. And we did this, in fairness. If you go to our blackandgoldbanneret.com, we did break it down in detail. Bryson, as you heard, did a lot of work on that. Let me, couple things. If Gene McDowell doesn't get into the Hall of Fame, does this happen? Like, the Gene McDowell getting in last year opened the door to maybe look back and get some people that maybe were overlooked back then. That's one part of it, the question there. From that standpoint, what do you think of that? Do you think is there any correlation there?
That brings up a really good point, actually, because obviously, if Gene McDowell getting into the Hall of Fame had to be a major undertaking, because obviously the way his career ended, and so That brings up an interesting point because maybe you focus on getting G McDowell in for so long that you really
Who was
don't.
his head coach, by the way? G.
Yeah,
McDowell was the head coach for Mark Giacomo.
so that you
And you
end up.
probably had a bunch of those teammates, a lot of those teammates, right? I'm guessing here, just guessing, right? They've probably been pushing for Gene McDowell for many years. That's been well documented about that topic. We're not going to do that. But he gets in last year. And you wonder, I mean, I saw some of those former players there at the ceremony last year. Does that all of a sudden get some guys thinking, hey, maybe we should get our brother in, our guy here? You know, he's over, right? Who
Well,
knows? Who knows?
This is what I think it is. I think it's a matter of focus. Because
Sure.
if you're focusing on getting G McDowell it doesn't mean that Mark Giacomo doesn't exist. You still could have inducted Giacomo in the entire time, but the focus was on Gene. And so
yes.
that's an interesting point that the fight to get Gene in ended up kind of overshadowing, to say,
I think Gene, I think that helped.
Says, hey, what, like if you're fighting for G McDowell and then somebody else in the room goes and says, hey, wait a minute, what about Mark Giacomo? Then they'll be like, well, yeah, but we're fighting for Gene right now. So
that could be, fair point. But this also brings up a point that you and I have brought up. I don't know how many years we've done this podcast.
I started in April 2021, so this is my.
So since then,
this is my fourth Hall of Fame that I have. My fourth Hall of Fame that I have seen inducted.
So since then, we have made this case that if I would change anything about the process right now, they've added up to 6 this year. They had 7 last year. It's been 5 in the past. I would include categories because other schools do this. I think you can increase the class to 6 or 7, and you include a category of legendary people or athletes and coaches pre this century. In other words, 25, like for example, like 25 years. If an athlete or a coach played 25 years ago, was their last game, and maybe they got overlooked, like a Mark Giacomo, you could put them in that category. So that way, because my concern now, what we're going to run into is you're going to run into conflicts where especially you're comparing. Correct, but you're comparing guys from 80s and 90s athletes versus athletes of the modern era, which, with respect, are better athletes. It's just the evolution of life. And that's a very it's a very awkward situation from that standpoint, Bryson. What do you expand on that? What do you think of that idea?
I absolutely love that idea. It's the way Cooperstown works. It's the way the Baseball Hall of Fame works. And I think it's a wonderful system, and it allows people to essentially get a second chance because the UCF Hall of Fame, because obviously UCF sports has been going on for a very long time since the university was founded. So the Hall of Fame didn't become a thing until 1998. So you already, I don't care how long it is. You can't, unless you're not very good athletically, you will end up having a lot of people that you're going to want to induct into the Hall of Fame minute one, but only with a limited number of spots. So from day one of the Hall of Fame's existence, they had to play catch up. And in the process, some people just end up getting overlooked. That's what happens. That's why having an errors committee is so useful, because it allows you to be able to keep people from the early days of UCF in mind. Well,
I think it would make the committee's job a little easier, because I got to be honest with you, because people have asked me, why, you should be in the committee. Maybe you should. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to be in with what's ahead. Like, that is a brutal job to try to pinpoint and nitpick certain athletes. I mean, we're talking like minute stuff here. That's a huge difference. And I wonder if that would help to, hey, because listen, here's the concern, right? That some people, okay, so Mark Giacomo gets in. Are we going to start hearing about other football players from back then? They're like, hey, what about this person? What about that person? And then who's watching out? For example, I'm going to give you some names here. Rick Brantzovic, goalkeeper, UCF men's soccer, 81 to 83, 3-time All-American. You look at his stats, Bryson, you can make the argument he is 1B to Winston DuBose's 1A. But for whatever reason, Rick Brancevic didn't get into the Hall of Fame. Maybe he didn't have a degree. I don't know what the story is there. But Rick Brancevic, you could argue, is the second greatest goalkeeper in men's soccer history, right behind Winston DuBose. And I don't think the gap is that big to the point where one is in the Hall of Fame and Winston DuBose and Brancevic is not. Now, DuBose had a better international career. Maybe that was a difference. I don't know. But he played in the early 80s. Who's watching out for him? Let's bring up two volleyball players. Emily Kaiser, Miriam Metzges. We've discussed in previous platforms before. They were kind of the Amber Olsen and McKenna Melville of the early 90s for UCF volleyball. It's a dynastic run, won conference championships. They're still up there. I think Kaiser's the all-time leader in assists still in volleyball, UCF volleyball history. Metzges still top 5, top 6 in kills all time, up there in digs. They were overlooked because, again, the Hall of Fame back then was not every year. There's other reasons I'm not going to get into, I think, but I think we all can figure out how thankfully we're not in that era. Like this era, this committee's done, I can tell you, is fantastic. Like the process today is night and day, way better than it was way back then. But they got overlooked. So who's going to watch them, a quote lesser popular sport? And I think there's some wait, is football just going to get the benefit of the doubt every time? Oh, well, let's go get this person from the 80s or 90s, but we're not looking at those. That's the other concern that some people have. Your response to those concerns are what?
No, I think it's valid concerns to have. I mean, you look at the men's soccer record book, Rick Brancevic. I mean, Randy DeShield. I would argue Randy DeShield from the late 70s is one of the greatest scorers in program history. Like he's 56 goals. That's a lot. And yet no word on him in the UCF Athletics Hall of Fame. You have, of course, sports that have been ignored for the longest time. Like only in the recent era, since I've been around at the Banneret, has the UCF Hall of Fame finally inducted a track athlete, a rower, and just this year a women's golfer. So it has been.
We're going to get it. And there's a couple athletes in golf. We'll get into that as an example as well.
So it's only recently that these sports, entire programs that have been, or at least as far as athletes go, have been overlooked by the Hall of Fame. And so what's going to happen with those programs? Because they're going to have the same issues that football has, where they could have some really good modern players. Volleyball has some really great modern players. Delana Sardin, Kia Bright, McKenna Melville. But so what does that do for people like Metzges and Kaiser, who Metzges was McKenna Melville before McKenna Melville. And so the fact that McKenna is going to be I think she's going to be a first ballot Hall of Fame consideration once she's eligible. And so the fact that she could get in while Metzges doesn't, because her era was overlooked, is, I would argue, just a travesty in the sense that,
and that is not for the record, that is not the committee's fault in the current.
Oh yes, it's not their fault right now. It is not their fault. It is not the current committee's fault right now. What I'm saying is that the inclusion of an errors committee would be useful, so that way we can be able to look
like I
back
said, or put the category up where you separate it, where hey, athletes that play from 2000 or before, let's just say, that's a category, and you're great. You could induct somebody in there, and then that way you separate them from the current athletes from the last 10 years, for example. I just think that would make things a little more fair for everybody, and more fair for the committee in doing their work.
Oh, exactly. It makes things a lot more fair. Look what happened to Giacone. Look at that face. Look at his face when he is given the news that he was inducted into the UCF Athletics Hall of Fame. That is the face of a man who was waiting for this moment for a long time and finally is getting recognition, because everybody loves getting recognized for what they do.
Well, especially when they're shot, they're surprised. I don't think he saw it coming. So yeah,
true. But so waiting for so long time, and so I think that why not do that again? At least for one person.
Well, that's why again, our big thing is let's add a category, so that way, because look, we'll use volleyball as an example. Next year, you could have Miriam Metzges, Emily Kaiser, Jordan Pingle, who's the greatest libero ever recently, or graduated in 2018. She's eligible. What do you do there? What do you do there if you're a committee? What do you do?
Yeah,
That's a log jam. And so if you do an extra category, maybe you have Kaiser and Metzges under a different category. You're not having to compare her to Jordan Pingle. That's all we're saying. So,
Yeah.
All right, we spent a decent amount of time on that. Last thing. Here's the last thing. I'm going to give you a little. I want to test you here, Bryson, since you've obviously studied up GKCO stats so very well, as you've proven in depth. I'm going to read you. I'm going to give you some names. All right. I've got 10 running backs, top 10 UCF running backs all time in my personal list. I'm going to ask you, pick. Who would you pick? All right. For example, Kevin Smith versus Mark Giacone. Who are you picking? Kevin Smith, I assume?
Yes, Kevin Smith.
Okay. So I'm just curious where you're going to rank Mark Giacone on your list here. So you'll see where I'm going with this.
Okay.
Latavius Murray or Mark Giacone?
Murray, NFL career.
Marquette Smith or Mark Giacone?
Ooh, that's
fun. This is fun.
That's a good one. That's a really good one. That I would argue that Giacone and Smith might be. I think that's a toss-up because Marquette Smith might be better talent-wise, but because of what he did in just 2 seasons. But I think Giacone had the better career because he also, did something very athletically praisable by coming back from that knee injury, and he had a full career to do what he did. So I think that might be more of an apples and oranges type of comparison. So I would actually put them on relatively equal footing.
All right, I have Smith. Obviously, this is kind of basically this order is my order. But
they're gonna ask. It's on the day for me. You could ask me a different day, and I could say,
Smith got into the Hall of Fame first. Which,
and
again, committee thought of him highly. Elgin Davis.
Yes, I think Giacone. I think Giacone over Elgin Davis, and that's only because I think Giacone was the second great rusher after Elgin Davis. And I think actually he finished second all time. Like when his career finished, he was second all time in program history to Elgin Davis, but that was with his regular season stats. If you factor his postseason stats into the picture, he surpassed Elgin. So, and for me, valuing postseason stats like I do, I would say Mark Giacone over Elgin Davis, but that's also because Elgin Davis was inducted relatively early on when it comes.
He got inducted earlier. He also got drafted in the NFL draft, which is pretty impressive.
Oh, yeah.
Back then. So I have Elgin ahead. Willie English.
His backfield mate. Yeah, that's really hard. That is really hard. I mean, for one, most of Giacone's career was in the Division II, while Willie English was most of his career was FCS. So you have that to go. You have that to think about. I mean, oh man, that's a good one. That's a really good one. I would say Mark Giacone barely because of the knee injury comeback. I think that because Willie English, I think had Mark Giacone not gotten hurt, I think he would be right on English's level had Giacone not gotten hurt, and he managed to come back from that. And he managed to come back.
Injuries are part of the game. I have English because the committee back then picked English over Giacone, which was the point I made earlier. They picked him over him.
Yeah,
so I have to respect that. Whether you agree with it or not, it's a whole different category. So this is interesting. You and I like this though. This is why I wanted to do this exercise. Here's a fun one. This is the one that's really people been bringing up to me. Alex Haynes or Mark Giacone.
Woo! Yeah. Woo! This is
the hot bullet point one.
Yeah, this is the hard one. Willie English, by the way, third all-time history. That's all time. Alex Haynes is above Willie English on that list. Number 2 all-time, 3,359 rushing yards. Let's look at rushing attempts. You look at all-time career rushing attempts. You see Alex Haynes had 742. That's number 2 all time in rushing attempts. So they gave him the ball quite a lot. Not as much as Kevin Smith, but a lot. Willie English got 606. Mark Giacone, by the way, is actually in this top 10 all time. 452 carries all time. So he had about 150 carries less than Willie English, but this one's even more pronounced. 742 versus 452. That's nearly 300 carries. That's a full running back career for some people. So the question that I think comes into play when you bring up Mark Giacone versus Alex Haynes is, do you look at that raw rushing numbers, or do you determine what they did with those yards? That, I think, is the big question that you get to that. If I had to say right now, I think I would give the slight nod to Mark Giacone, because I do think that team success should matter. I think now, when I say it should matter, I don't mean in terms of whether it's honoring in the Hall of Fame or not. Alex Haynes deserves to be honored in the Hall of Fame. But if you put 1v1, like who would I induct first between Giacone and Haynes, then I would give the edge to Giacone. That doesn't mean Haynes shouldn't be, but I think Giacone has the slight nod because he did more with what he was given. And I think that I think that's going to be my rationale. That Giacone did more with what he was given than Alex Haynes did.
The committee agrees with you, obviously. Like Giacone got in. Haynes has not been in yet. By the way, the first 5 names I mentioned, Kevin Smith.
I cannot emphasize this enough. Haynes should be in. I want to make sure I emphasize that.
Very good. Kevin Smith, Latavius Murray, Marquette Smith, Elgin Davis, Willie English, by the way. Those first 5 names, it's not by accident. I mentioned them in that order. Those 5 are in the Hall of Fame already, which Giacone joins from a running back position. Haynes is not in yet. I'm going to throw these 2 names: Adrian Killings, Otis Anderson versus Mark Giacone. See, this is why I'm pro the category of separating these, because how the heck are we supposed to compare that, Bryson?
Yeah, that part, I think, is...
I'll throw in Greg McCrae. How do you compare those? You could argue that McCrae and Giacone are similar.
Yeah, I do.
But again, different eras.
Yeah, no, I do agree with you on that. I do. It's... Oh, man. I think Adrian...
Because here's what happens, right? If you say Giacone's better than Adrian Killings, the people the last decade are like, are you crazy? You're out of your mind, and everything like that. If you say Adrian Killings is better, people are like, oh, you're disrespecting the guys that were here before you, right? So it's a no-win situation, which is why, again, I am for separating them into different categories. I don't think you can put them in the same category, in my opinion.
Okay, here's what I'll say. Hold a gun to my head. Which one do I pick? I am actually going to go Adrian Killings, and this is why. I want to make sure. Again, it is not because I am disrespecting, but this is my rationale for it. Adrian Killings finishes UCF career with 406 rushing attempts. The same number, by the way, that Greg McCrae was. You look at the rushing yards total. Now, again, Mark Giacone probably had a little more because, again, I'm looking at the UCF record books. They don't count the postseason. So Adrian Killings on the all-time rushing list is number 6, ahead of Mark Giacone with less carries than him.
Passing league is more of a pass sport now than it was back in the 80s.
This is rushing yards. This is rushing yards.
No, but I'm saying, like, Killings played in an era where they threw the football more than they did back in the 80s, 90s. My point.
Yeah. So you have that, and Greg McCrae as well. And Greg McCrae. Greg McCrae is the 4th rusher in program history at 2,620. Same number of carries that Adrian Killings had. So I think I would actually choose all 3 of them over Giacone, because, again, it's the same rationale with Giacone and Alex Haynes. McCrae, Killings, and Otis, and Otis, because Otis was more of a Swiss Army knife, but I think it was Swiss Army knife. I think all-purpose yards right up there. All did more with what they were given than what Giacone did, and Giacone got to the postseason just like the 2017 team did with the Fiesta Bowl. So I would say all 3 of them over Giacone, but for the same reason that I would choose Giacone over Alex Haynes. I won't say that I'm not consistent, Eric. I want to make sure that if anyone comes at me,
everybody has their reasons. Everybody has their reasons, and that's just is what it is. But the reason I did that exercise, it just gives you how complicated this could get. Which is why, again, I think you should do a legendary category, not a category. I don't want to call it old timers, but you could call it the pre-FBS or 25 years, whatever.
I mean, I think the eras category could be a pretty
That could
cool.
be it. That could be what it is. All right. That we've done over an hour on football talk, bro.
Well,
You can't say we don't.
To be fair, the discussion points of Giacone's stats and of Giacone's stats and the running backs and then Shaquem's eligibility, that was, I think, I would argue, the biggest discussion points in terms of like tangential topics, I feel like, in a sense.
I'm going to throw another name that has been overlooked, and he's currently on the staff. Darren Hinshaw.
Yeah.
Oh, Darren Hinshaw, you could argue, is the fourth best quarterback in the history of this program, behind Milton, Culpepper, Bortles. I think everybody would agree in some order, those are your top three. I think Hinshaw's your number four. Even me, who is a huge Ryan Schneider fan, because I think the argument, some would say, well, what about Ryan Schneider? But you look at what Hinshaw did during his time, you can make the case he's number four. He has been overlooked as well, and he played in those early to mid-90s. Some people would also bring up a Darren Slack. Jeff has. Let's bring up Jeff Sharon, who did do an article on Mark Giacomo, interviewed Mark Giacomo years ago on blackandgoldbanneret.com. He's made the case for Darren Slack. I'm more of a Darren Hinshaw guy, personally. I think Hinshaw should be in first over those guys. But again, it just adds to my point. Add that to the category. Because again, the problem now is if you include those guys, then it's going to be at somebody else's expense if you don't kind of change it. But anyway, that's my last one.
Yeah, I think so. I think the thing with Hinshaw though is that he is on the staff, which means that they can wait a little bit for him because it's not like he's going, because it's quite possible.
And that's fine, but I'm just saying. I mean, that's easy to say that now, but then next thing you know, we forget. So I'm just saying. I want to throw that out there.
Hinshaw, I think it's a clear number four, though. I think he's a clear number four. Like, if you want to Mount Rushmore of UCF quarterbacks, Dante, Blake, McKenzie, and then Hinshaw. I think that is very true. Like, I would totally agree with you on that. If there's another quarterback that's going to get in, I think it should be Hinshaw. Slack is somebody that I think would really benefit from an errors committee thing, but I think Hinshaw, I think would get in under normal circumstances still to this day.
We'll see. All right, let's move. We still got four other people to talk about.
Yeah, I know.
So we're not going to go as long on these other ones. Let's actually go to the two female athletes, and then we'll get to Duffy and Spurl at the back end that way. Let's start with women's golf. Ashley Holder becomes the first women's golfer ever to be inducted to the UCF Athletic Hall of Fame. She played recently, 2014 to 2016, first ballot Hall of Famer, as a matter of fact, that you could go from there. You look at her, I would say this, Bryson, she is without question the greatest UCF women's golfer of the 21st century. There is not a better golfer that has a UCF golfer that has a better resume to date that has played here since 2000 than Ashley Holder. Three-time All-American honorable mention, and it's led them to conference championships, regional appearances. She competed in the regionals, qualified as an individual. She's helped them in team competition. We voted her. We had her 15th in our top 100 UCF female athletes list that was compiled in 2023. She helped them win 2 American Conference Championships titles, helped them make 3 NCAA regionals. An Orlando native, was an all AAC selection all 4 years, unanimous twice, was the first ever, and she's also, I believe, 3-time American Conference Golfer of the Year. You cover golf, the UCF golf program, as well as in depth as anybody. Your reaction, Ashley Holder, getting it?
Absolutely. I think she is one of the greatest golfers in program history. I mean, even like the current, I would argue the current era might actually have the greatest golfers talent-wise, but in terms of what they accomplished, because women's golf is, the competitiveness in women's golf has really increased, honestly really increased over the past decade. It's kind of amazing. But I think Ashley Holder, for what her accomplishments for the program, has definitely earned her the right to be the first one to be inducted into this program. By the way, has not been overlooked for a very long time. So the fact that a first ballot Hall of Famer is the one to get inducted, to be first, I think is a nice sign to be like, hey, she is worth being first, to the point that we're going to do it immediately once she is eligible to do so. Conference champion, that's something that a lot of other people can't say. Individually too, the 2017 title. And of course, she was a Golf Week All-American, and that's a Golf All-American. And remember, she was the last one to get an All-American of any kind until just this past summer when Molly Smith and Sandwich DeSutham both got it. So getting All-American is a very hard thing to do, and Ashley Holder was able to do that. I think she's a very great first choice for modern era. The big thing, and she is worth getting in, but it also just kind of comes at the expense of this program has been ignored for a very long time by the Hall of Fame over the season.
Egregiously with the success they've had over the years, century. Like there's men's golfers that have gotten in. So it's not like this is a golf thing. It was women. You're right. They have definitely been overlooked for a long time. And if the committees in the past, I agree with Holder getting in this year. If the committee in the past would have done, I think, a better job, Ashley Holder would not be the first women's golfer ever to be inducted.
Oh yes, I think
that's going back to, we just had this long talk about the GKCO situation, everything like that. To me, Liz Early and Kristen Putman, which I will let you explain their careers here in a moment, should have been in by now. And I find it weird, Bryson, that you have the all-time most wins golfer in women's golf, UCF women's golf history, and in UCF men's golf history. Neither are in the Hall of Fame at this point.
Yeah,
I think that needs to be fixed down the road. Nothing against that, but again, let me emphasize: Holder should absolutely be in this year. No issues there. She is arguably the greatest golfer, period, regardless of era. Yeah. Definitely in the new era. But I'm going to let you give the platform here. I do think let's give it a nod here, a tip of the cap, if you will, to Liz Early and Kristen Putman, who have been overlooked, was overlooked way back in the day.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's go ahead with Liz Early, I think, is the one that, if you really had to put a gun to my head, Liz Early or Kristen Putman, Liz Early played on the LPGA. She went pro in the sport.
So she would be eligible in multiple categories, not just for her UCF career, but her career after UCF category. Like a lot of the NFL guys, she played in the LPGA.
Yeah. So the fact that she wasn't in, and to my knowledge, she is from what I've seen, she is the only UCF athlete that I've seen, women's golfer that I've seen play in the LPGA, from my knowledge, or from what I've looked at. So the fact that she still stands alone to this day, given the talent that has come through this program, I think is crazy that she's not in already. She was also a conference champion, by the way. She won the Sun Belt when UCF was in there for 1 year in that. So she's a conference champion as well. Kristen Putman was a conference champion with the A-Sun title. With the A-Sun title, she won that. So, and of course, Putman leads the program with eight. She was an All-American as well. In fact, the body that gave Molly Smith and Sandwich DeSutham their All-Americans, the WGCA, Women's Golf Coaches Association, the last person to get a All-American honor, like a UCF person to get an All-American honor from them, was Putman. Which was decades ago. On the one hand, that obviously that shows the talents of Molly Smith and Sandwich DeSutham. But on the other hand, man, it took that long. How good was Putman to be able to get an All-American honor in terms of UCF history, and nobody else for decades, even Holder, wasn't able to do that. So I think that Putman and Early already, I think, have much proven themselves to that they should have been inducted into the Hall of Fame a long time ago. I would argue, obviously they all played during the era in which the Hall of Fame didn't exist yet. This was right before Hall of Fame first became a thing in 1998.
And again, when they started the Hall of Fame, they would do it every 3 or 4 years, which makes it complicated.
Yes.
I like what they're doing now, where it's every year.
Yes,
I think
exactly.
Some people are like, well, do we have enough athletes? I'm like, yes, of course we do. If you do the research, and this is an example right here. So hopefully this gets resolved at some point down the road somehow. And again, not to sound like a broken record, but if you add that extra eras category, I think that could help a lot. It could help the committee a lot. But I think those two should be acknowledged. And from the golf standpoint, and by the way, for the record, I just want to state this. Some people are like, "Well, what are they? Are they your friends? Are you putting?" I've never met these people in my life. Couldn't tell you.
Oh
So
yeah.
I'm just looking at the numbers, and based on our rankings, as we did prep stuff for these were two. I mean, those two are in the right there at the top among women's golf history. Look at the numbers, the resume, everything. I want to mention, so we do got to speed this up. We're going to go no huddle a little bit. 4 other golfers I want to mention for future Bryson, for future standpoint. Excuse me, 2 names. Liz Early and Putman on women's golf. Give me another name, women's golf. I mean, those are the 2 most immediate. Is there anybody on the horizon on women's golf to look out for? Or is the next golfer to be inducted potentially could be on the men's side with a couple of notables? Greg Eason, who was a fantastic golfer for Bryce Waller during the CUSA era, and Ricardo Govea, who has been participating in the Olympics and has been playing professionally in Europe. Those are 2 men's golfers that some would suggest could be the next golfers down at some point to get inducted in the Hall of Fame, at least on the men's side. Your thoughts on all that?
Yes, I do think that the next golfer is going to be Ricardo Govea. The committee clearly loves Olympians. Olympians. It happened with Afia Charles. That's why she was the first track athlete to be inducted.
And for those who don't know, Govea was in the 2016 Olympics in Rio representing Portugal in men's golf.
Yes. So I think Govea should get in. Will be the next golfer to get in in terms of like under normal circumstances. If Nair's committee wasn't there, I think Putman and Early could potentially get in before that. But as it stands right now, I think Govea is going to get in first. Greg Eason, I think I would argue, is in the conversation for one of the greatest golfers for his UCF career in program history. So I think he is definitely worth considering in there as well. The Olympics just kind of pushed Govea over the top a little bit. It's the Olympics. It is what it is. As far as the women go, so Tanrata Pitton actually just recently she won her first title in the Thai LPGA, and when you look at the raw stats, I actually think that she might be the best golfer in program history from a raw stats standpoint, from what she did on the course. And I think if her pro career kind of speeds along as well, then I think that she'll end up getting consideration. Well, she actually has more, by the way, has more wins. She has 4 wins in her UCF career. That's more than Holder. Holder won 3 times individually in her UCF career. While Pitton got 4.
You know, there's one person that's qualified that can answer that question.
Emily Marin.
Yeah, we're gonna have to get her on the podcast down the road here.
Absolutely.
Probably before. All right, include me in this year. I know we're gonna do at some point. We'll talk to her about the upcoming season, but we got some historical stuff we need to discuss and run it by her. But
oh yeah, absolutely.
But Pitton, by the way, I just kind of again I want to speed this up a little bit. Pitton would not be eligible
for a while.
So let's kind of put that on the back burner for now.
It's going to be for a while. It's going to be for a while. You also have.
And I'd rather people focus on Liz Early and Putman in the next few years. In the meantime, on the women's side, I think Govea and Eason we've addressed on the men's side.
Yeah.
There. I want to mention real quick before we move on. Once there is a sport now that does not have an individual in the Hall of Fame now is men's and women's tennis. Gabe DeCamps is the one to watch on the men's tennis side. He is not eligible till 2028. I wrote this all, by the way, on blackandgoldbanneret.com in the article when I recap the 2024 Hall of Fame class. The women's side, you got Monica Matias eligible next year. I don't think that's going to be good enough. Victoria Wijaharma is another great women's tennis player from back in the 90s that's been overlooked. I don't know. Women's tennis might be a while. I don't know. That's a tricky one. But I just wanted to acknowledge that as a sport now that with women's golf crossed off the list, tennis is something that we'll see what happens here over the next 5 to 7 years if we get somebody from tennis on the men's or women's side that gets inducted. Let's move forward to cross country and track and field because Anne-Marie Blaney, Bryson Turner gets inducted. Long distance runner. First from the cross country side, second from track and field side. kind of give us the breakdown on Anne-Marie Blaney.
So Anne-Marie Blaney, if you look at the UCF cross country record book, it is like 75% Anne-Marie Blaney on there. She has her name appears 11 times on the fastest 5Ks of all time list. They keep track of about the top 20, like top 20-ish. And then she also owns the top 7, I believe it's 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. No, sorry, 8. No, 7. Yeah, 7. Top 7 6Ks in program history. No one's gotten even close to her since she left. She's also running the Olympic trials, which is, of course, a feather in one's cap in order to do that. She was just recently in Orlando for the marathon trial. She's been running marathons. She's gone pro in this field, but
she is by far. It is not even a
best,
debate.
right, best distance runner of all time.
Right, it's not even close. It's like if yeah, she would literally lap the field. Here, I'll pun intended here. She would lap the field.
Ha, good one. She also has the all-time. She still holds the 5K and 10K outdoor track and field record, by the way. So she still holds that to this day. She also owns the indoor records for the mile, 3K, and 5K. Like, you look at distance running across all of UCF track and field, Anne-Marie Blaney just dominates the field in every single aspect. She's the best distance runner this program has ever had. I really don't think we've had anybody that has come close to her level over their time at UCF. And you look at, she actually got to the NCAA championships in there. UCF does not get distance runners to the NCAA championships. They usually get sprinters in there. Anne-Marie Blaney made it twice, the 2016 outdoor championships and the 2017 indoor championships, which, by the way, she got a top 10 in that one. She finished 8th in that 2017 indoor championship 5K. So I think that as far as a distance runner goes, Anne-Marie Blaney, I think, is the only one, at least under normal circumstances, that would get into the UCF Hall of Fame.
It's a no-brainer, and credit to the committee, because I wondered, man, could she get overlooked? Because that's not an like long distance runner. That's not an athlete that gets a lot of hype, right? A lot of attention. I think they nailed this perfectly. I think credit to the committee for not letting her get overlooked on this one.
She is now the second track athlete to get in, by the way, after Afia Charles.
2021, they were teammates briefly. Yeah.
So after getting ignored for a very long time, track and field now has 2 athletes into the UCF Athletics Hall of Fame over the course of this decade. I think there's definitely
probably more to do. And there should have more to come, because we ranked, by the way, Anne-Marie Blaney 16th, I believe, in the top 100 female athletes list. You could argue maybe we ranked it too low on there. Ariel Scott, national champion 2013, 60-meter decorated. Should be the next track athlete to get in. Should have already been in. If it was me, Bryson, she would have been my 6th person this year's class. With Blaney, go in there with Blaney. She's a national champion.
Yeah,
she earned it. Hello. Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, it's another log jam. It's a little
bit of a log. You're right, track, and again, it's track. It's a tricky thing. I have been told that she has support within that room, so don't be surprised if she gets in probably in the next year or two.
Yeah.
I think she should be in.
Her teammate Octavius Freeman, Jackie Coward. I think those 3
get consideration as well. But I think we both agree, Scott, got to be the next.
Scott's number 1. I think Scott's number 1. National champion. She's UCF's only national champion and an individual, and she is not in. Like,
yes.
let me put.
We have her in the top 10. We have her in the top 10 all-time female athlete list. For those that have watched Renaya Jones, right? I mean, you could argue Scott is right there, if not better than Renaya Jones, who has made a huge impact in the last few years.
Agreed. Agreed. That's one of the reasons why when we ranked it, we put Scott and Jones right next to each other, because I think both of them and their impacts in the program were immeasurable. I think Renaya from just a visibility perspective, and then Scott from her pure talent. And by the way, Renaya, now that she has graduated, I think that she's now going to be on the clock. I think she's just like Anne-Marie Blaney, where I think she's going to actually get first ballot consideration once she becomes eligible
It'll be a while, boy. Yeah, no, that's not.
It's
Boy,
gonna be a
that's
while. It's gonna be a while. Let's put it this
well,
way.
not only that, it's gonna be stacked. It's gonna be
Oh
really
yeah,
stacked.
and that's why we
committee.
got to get Scott, and that's why we got to get Scott Freeman and
Well,
Cowell in
fantastic point.
Scott point.
That is I'm glad you brought that up, because some people might be watching and say, "Why are you nitpicking this? Why does it matter?" Like what? And this is why you just brought it up. You're trying to avoid log jams where you make things very complicated and very uncomfortable. We're like, well, why has this person been left out? Why is this person? That's how that happens. You get log jams and you get kind of sidetracked. So that's why it's important, because if, let's say Ariel Scott doesn't get in until like 7 years from now, well, now you're comparing her to Renaya Jones. I mean, that's a no-win situation. So that's why that's a good point you bring up there. On the track and field side. Let's move on to baseball. Chris Duffy, second year in a row, baseball gets represented. Ryan Bono last year. Chris Duffy.
Kyle Bono.
That's what
you said. Ryan.
I know my Bono brothers. The Bono brothers. I always call them different names. Kyle Bono is the Hall of Famer. And now we'll be joined by Chris Duffy, who gets in. Bryson, when you look at baseball, arguably the greatest season any UCF baseball player, at least hitter-wise, has ever had, without question, was Chris Duffy in 2010 when he was the Golden Spikes finalist for UCF. Held a lot of offensive categories. Most recently was the home run king until Ben McKay broke that about a year ago. But Chris Duffy, Bryson Turner, Hall of Fame.
Yeah. I think that's a great choice. I mean, look, when you look at like non-football men's athletes to induct, that's another case where I think log jams are going to come into play with this, because you have baseball, men's soccer, men's golf, like all these other sports vying for a spot that's probably only ever going to get one per year in the UCF Athletics Hall of Fame inductee class. And so when you look at baseball, I think Chris Duffy makes a lot of sense for being the next person inducted. For one, it's definitely been a hot minute since a hitter has been inducted. Kyle Bono, of course, inducted last year, was a pitcher. But as far as hitters go, it's been a minute. Drew Butera was the last one to get in, and that was in 2019. So and he also played in the MLB. So I think this is as good a time as any to induct a guy like Chris Duffy, especially since he just lost the home run king title. Having that recency in mind, I think, is very important, because this is what I feel like, by the way, happened in the past, where people started getting passed up, and then you don't remember it, and then when you look at the list, it's like, oh, they're second. But like the more recent somebody gets when they lose a title like that to get into the Hall of Fame, this is, I think, sort of like a preservation move to make sure, like, hey, let's make sure we get him in now, because we don't want to overlook him later, because otherwise he would be at a much bigger risk of being overlooked later if he doesn't get in now. But that's as far as the home run king goes. 43 home runs, tied with Bobby Kaiser. Absolutely well done. His 2010 season, though, absolutely phenomenal. Golden Spikes nominee. His 21 home runs that year is still the single season record. Even Ben McCabe in 2023 couldn't get past that. He's the only one to get more than 20 home runs in a season. 81 RBIs, still single season leader. Slugging percentage, .850. That is by the way, is over a 10th. I mean, Dustin Brisson is number 2 at 748. That is over a 10th in slugging percentage. I mean, that's just domination in terms of slugging. And of course, his batting average of 447 is still the single season program record. Nobody has gotten even close to that since. So absolutely well done. One of the greatest hitters in program history. Well deserved.
As a student, I watched him. It was a joy. He's a friend, casual friend, not friend. We're friendly. Man, he was fun to watch. A great personality. I don't know if Brian Murphy covered him or not. We'll have to ask him, Bryson. Ask Brian Murphy if he covered it. Brian's a historian. The Yoda of Black and Gold Banneret. He's gonna hate that I said that.
He hates it when we mention period.
Well, we just did. So there,
Sorry,
you can't talk UCF baseball without Brian Murphy. That's just a law here on Black and Gold Banneret. Yeah, he's amazing. That's a great. I didn't realize about the whole haven't had a hitter in a while, but interesting. Very well deserved. You mentioned those season stats. career-wise second in homers, 6 in RBIs, total bases, top 10 as well, slugging percentage, drafted in the 26th round by the Philadelphia Phillies. Awesome player. So I'm really glad that he got in for sure on the baseball side. And you look ahead for baseball moving forward, that's 2 years in a row, Bryson, for baseball that's gotten in. Some notable names to keep in mind down the road. Matt Fox, who was the teammate of Kyle Bono, won the ASUN Pitcher of the Year. Does he get in down the road? Certainly the one that we're not going to spend time talking about it here, but certainly could become a conversation down the road is Jake Bergman. We know how that ended off the field situation in his career in 08. Does that, with Gene McDowell getting in, does that maybe open the door for a Jake Bergman down the road to get in for an incident that happened, quite frankly, 16 years ago? That I don't know. I mean, I joked about you can't talk UCF baseball without Jake Bergman. So I just find that it's just weird. But, that's baseball in a nutshell is weird like that. Tommy Novak was an ace pitcher. Brian Ahern, ace pitcher from UCF baseball in 89, had a great career. Tommy Novak really helped UCF baseball in their transition to Division I baseball in the mid-'80s. So those are some names to bring up on the baseball side, at least in the most recent one. DJ Hicks was a great hitter from an offensive standpoint, 2-time All-American as well. So those are some names to float for baseball down the road here in the next handful of years.
Here's a question for you. Considering his most recent resurgence in the MLB, how about Ben Lively?
I think, him and Dylan Moore.
Yeah, him too.
When their careers are done, absolutely, I think will get strong in consideration to be in the Hall of Fame. Dylan Moore has been in the major leagues for a long time now, had a good career at UCF. And then Ben Lively, what a great story. Me and Brian Murphy interviewed him during the pandemic when he was playing in the KBO, in the Korean Baseball League. Remember when the KBO was the only thing that was going on, and we all stayed up to watch it because there was nothing else on? Ben Lively was playing there and eventually got himself back into the big leagues. We interviewed him, like 4 some years ago. You could probably find that on our YouTube channel. Just look up the archives. Yeah, that's a great point. If Ben could kind of have, and he's had a nice year for Cleveland, looks like they're going to be in the postseason. You're right. Those are 2 good names to bring up down the road. But I don't think you bring those. I don't think that happens until their careers are over. Because as they learned with 2019 with Drew Butera, if a baseball player is still active, they're not going to be able to come for a Hall of Fame ceremony, especially in November. Maybe in November. It's tight because it is that team in the postseason and they're in the World Series. For example, like Cleveland, they could be a World Series team this year, and he wouldn't be available. So I think you got to wait. My thing is, unless the sports don't conflict, you almost have to wait till their careers is done. And I think if the Hall of Fame is going to stay in the fall, I don't think you could put in a football player that's active in the NFL until they're done.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. One other name I want to mention.
I think that would apply to baseball to some extent.
Oh yeah. Last name I think I'll mention or one name I got to mention for baseball, Joe Rogers, all-time saves leader, even more than Jason Arnold, who's in the Hall of Fame right now.
Well, Arnold was a great starter and closer, but to your point, Joe Rogers, best closer in the sport, in the program history. That's the argument to be made there. I don't know if committees will really look at that as highly as you might, for example. Right? It's kind of like kickers. Do they get the benefit of the doubt? I don't know. But that's a good name to bring up, though. It's a good name. I'm not going to argue with you. I like Joe Rogers.
It helps. I think it helps, by the way, with Hall of Fame's case, because I can't believe we haven't brought his name up. I think it really helps that we have Rich Wallace back as the head coach. That baseball
who can help and talk about some of these people because he's either played with or coached or recruited. No doubt, that's always a positive to bring that up when you have coaches in that that are around that you can ask. Hey, what do you think about this person? Which is foreshadowing probably our fall ball conversation with him in a few months. Last name, Kirk Sparrow, the legend, UCF basketball coach. This is my favorite of this class for obvious reasons. I grew up as a student. I was in the student section. I saw the Kirk jerks. Bryson, I know you were not around for any of this, so this is all foreign to you.
I was born during right before the 2000-2001 season. So that was about.
You and I know.
Yeah.
Let me put it in perspective here. And I wrote a column back in the spring about how he should be in the Hall of Fame and everything. when he took over the UCF men's basketball program, he was an assistant at Florida under Lon Kruger, took over in 94. UCF men's basketball, you can make the argument they were the worst Division I men's basketball program in the country. They were a joke in the FBS level when they made that transition. He brought them to some credibility, 4 NCAA tournament with no budget, ASUN championships. And the thing that was so cool about him, Bryson, he was a guy to this day that knew how to connect with the fans. Like I would mention, like when he would walk into the court, the fans with the student section and the Kirks jerks would chant, Kirk, 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 Kirk. You know, if the UCF had won the game and the game was over late in the game, they would chant, good coach, and point to Kirk Sparrow. And then they would chant, bad coach, and point to the losing coach. It was a unique atmosphere. It was a smaller, the venue, which you know now as the venue with volleyball, that's where the old basketball arena used to be held at held about 1,000 people. But it was very vibrant. I'll give you this quick story to give you an idea. I'm hanging out with some buddies after a UCF sporting event. Might have been a football game. Across the street, the Applebee's. In fact, I'll just mention them. They're not a sponsor, but they're right across the street. You know it very well. We've all eaten there before. So I'm hanging out there after a UCF game. This was, like 2000s, mid 2000s. In comes in Kirk Sparrow. He says, hey, guys, and we go, hey, coach. And then we go, hey, guys, how you doing? He shakes our hands. How you guys doing, man? What a great game, right? And we're talking about it. We spent like a few minutes talking about the football game and everything like that. He just was so cool about it. Like, think about it. It was just so awesome. He was like that. You would see him at a lot of the sporting events. Did with as I mentioned, a lot with very little. Had to overcome the lack of budget. Had to overcome the Graham brothers, Joey Graham and Stephen Graham, transferring, which set the program back because they went to the Power Conference in Oklahoma State. Helped build that arena that now exists in 2007. And, UCF did a great job. They did this thing. It's become a tradition now where they release the videos of all the calls, right? Of the Hall of Fame's finding out. And I like the touch they did this year where they added people that were connected to that Hall of Famer. Like Manny Messinger was the one that called Mark Giacone because Manny Messinger was around when Mark Giacone played. They had, for example, Rich Wallace call Chris Duffy, was in the phone call. Emily Marin called for Ashley Holder. My favorite of all that was Mark Daniels, who's been the voice of UCF athletics since the mid-90s, called Kirk from the arena that was built in 2007. And he's sharing the story. Hey, I'm calling you from this arena. What a great time when they was built and everything. It let him know that he was inducted to the Hall of Fame. I thought that was brilliant. I love the creativity on that. It was awesome that he was back for the Iowa State game. Were you there for the Iowa State basketball game that they honored the 94 team? I don't know if you were. I was doing softball.
I think I was.
You had to be. I don't know where else you'd be doing. You lived there. But it was cool to see him back. It was the first time he had been back since 2010. Amazing person. I'm just super excited. I know there's a lot of people that are excited. There's going to be a lot of Kirk's jerks that are buying tickets to that Hall of Fame event. Yeah, former players like Michael Donnell's going to be there, Jermaine Taylor, Taylor Young. I generally, from a person standpoint, Bryson, he is a spectacular person. Hopefully you get to meet him at some point in the next few months. Because he'll be there for the Hall of Fame ceremony. He'll be at the football game honored. I wonder out loud, does he stick around? Is he able to stick around maybe for the basketball season opener against Texas A&M, which is going to be a monster season opener? UCF basketball in a lot of ways, I think Torchy Clark, without question, is certainly speaks for itself to the importance of the basketball history of it. But if we just keep it to the Division I era and the Division I level, the two most important people in UCF basketball have been Kirk Sparrow and Johnny Dawkins. And without those two people, UCF probably doesn't have the credibility in basketball, which means I don't think they would be in the Big 12 today.
Oh, yeah. I completely agree with that. I mean, I think one of the coolest things that I saw is Kirk Sparrow in his very first season took a team that finished 10-17 in their first season in the ASUN in 1992-93 and turned it into the first ever NCAA tournament appearance, NCAA Division I tournament appearance by the program in 1993-94. I mean, he flipped that program around right away from minute one. And then you bring up the Kirks jerks. By the way, now that you bring up that story with the good coach thing, if there's enough Kirks jerks in the audience in the Hall of Fame, when he goes up, I think it would be the best thing ever if they said good coach to him right before he spoke for his
They might
acceptance.
say great coach. They should just say great coach.
That's a good one
I would
too.
update the chant. Go ahead.
That's a good one too. And you talk about that environment that they had, that that he created in the venue. I feel like that now. Maybe this is just because I wasn't around for it, but I feel like that sort of vibe got recaptured again this past season with men's basketball when they started Fear the Frond. Like, I feel like that the environment in UCF basketball has
Well,
almost
here's what I would say about that. I think after Kirk left, there was that year with Marcus Jordan in 2010 where they got off to an undefeated start in non-conference, was ranked in the top 25. That was Donnie Jones' first year. There was big crowds for that. But then they dipped in that second half of the year, and they never really recaptured that until, I would say, when UCF sold out the quarterfinal in the NIT in 2017 against Illinois. They won that game. They stormed the court. Johnny Dawkins speaks to the crowd on the court side. That was pretty awesome. But it wasn't consistent. To your point, they had senior night 2019 sold out where they beat Cincinnati. You knew we were going to the NCAAs. They've had good crowd. But you're right. As far as sustained for a whole year, you're right. With the first year in the Big 12, absolutely. That is very good comparison.
Yeah.
Again, bigger building. It's 10,000, or a little less than 10,000 they hold in the building. At the old arena, it was about 1,000, 2,000. So in fairness, it wasn't like they were packing the place with big crowds in the era. But the point is, they were passionate, and usually, a couple thousand fans are your most passionate people from that standpoint. But that's a very good comparison. Yes, passion. Yes, which is what. Yeah.
Passion is passion, no matter how many people are in the arena, Eric. That's why I feel like that the amount of people doesn't really matter. Is that whether it's 2,000 people or 10,000 people, like the passion is passion. And I think it just makes a lot of sense that Kirk Spearall is being inducted now of all times, when I would argue the passion for men's basketball is at the highest it's ever been since he's been here.
Absolutely. And they're in the Big 12. Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely, that's a great point. Okay.
Yeah. So Kirk, I think it's great that he did that. Of course, he was, he probably would have been inducted a lot sooner had he not spent a while as an assistant coach over at Iowa. That's where
fair.
He closed his where he closed his crease. He spent a long time at Iowa, 2010 to 2022. He spent a long time there. So I think that that it's a lot. It makes a lot of sense that he's inducted now, the year after G. McDowell is inducted. I do like the idea of going back and honoring coaches like that. I'm glad that it seems like the Hall of Fame has kind of been pushing that a little bit.
And rightfully so.
Oh yes, absolutely, like absolutely. So I think they honored Linda Gooch in 2022, cheerleading head coach,
who's by the way going to be inducted into the Florida Sports Hall of Fame next month at the Kia Center. Used to be the Amway Center. I keep calling it that, but it's the Kia Center now. So she's going to join the Florida Sports Hall of Fame, which is the state's Hall of Fame. She joins Torchy Clark. I believe she joins Michelle Akers, and I want to say Winston DeBose is the only UCF people to be inducted into that Hall of Fame.
Yeah. So you have her. You have George O'Leary in 2019. So you have O'Leary in 19. You took a year off in 21. Gooch in 22. McDowell in 23. And now Spearall in 24. So that's a lot of coaches over the past several Hall of Fame classes. And so I feel like that's a really good move on the committee's part. I almost kind of wish that coaches would, like, it's good to have a separate category for that, because I think having one category for coaches is always good to be able to go back and honor your past like that. And I think there are still some coaches that are definitely worth talking about down the line. But I think Kirk Spearall definitely retired a couple of years ago. Men's basketball passion's at an all-time high. Just the perfect time to induct him this year.
100% agree. 100%. Can't wait for that speech. Can't wait for him to get honored. That was awesome. And I really enjoyed that video a lot. So that'll be very cool deal there. You mentioned it who could be next from a coaching standpoint, I think some names will quickly throw out. We're not going to spend too much time because shoot, we're almost going on 2 hours here. Amanda Cromwell, women's soccer, has the credentials. We'll see if that happens here in the next few years. Renee Lourdes Gillespie, who started the softball program at UCF. I think those are two, Bryson, that jumps to my mind. Who jumps into your mind?
I think as soon as she retires from coaching, because currently she's head coaching at the University of Georgia, Carol Smith-Gilbert from track and field. I think we have to wait until
led him to the top 5 finish nationally in 2013.
Yes, you got to wait for her to retire, but I think that she definitely should be on the list. Gillespie, by the way, of course, is at Iowa right now. I think you have to wait for her retirement as well. So I think Cromwell would be like, I think the next one to like really think about like right off the bat at first. So you have her. I think Karen Richter could be in.
Isn't she? I think she's already in. She's already in.
Richter's in. Because she coached right away.
By the way, Karen Richter is now Karen Hoppen, the head coach of Auburn, who's in the top 10 in the country in women's soccer. Hello, shout out to Hall of Famer Karen Richter.
Oh yeah. Oh yes, absolutely. Well done on her part. You mentioned Jay Bergman when we talked about baseball. I think that conversation has to be had at some point. So I think he's definitely going. So I think he's definitely going to be one to consider. I think beyond that, I think those are probably the ones that
at least in the immediate next couple of years. There's more after that, but I think in the next 5 years, I think those are your names, right?
Yeah. I would very much agree with you on that.
Okay, let's quickly go through this before we wrap up.
Yeah, because there's some sports we haven't talked about yet.
Correct. So let's go through next year and beyond. Now let's mention men's basketball since we just finished with Kirk Spurall. Give you 3 names to watch. Keith Clanton still hasn't gotten in.
Yeah.
I don't know if that happens or not. 2026, both BJ Taylor and Taco Fall would be eligible for the UCF Athletic Hall of Fame. That will be interesting because who do you pick? Do you pick one over the other? Do you try to get them both in the same class? I think they both should be in. They both will be in. But will they both get in at the same time? Will one of them get in first? That will be interesting. But I think 2026 is to circle as the more likely possibility of a basketball Hall of Fame coming from either BJ Taylor or Taco Fall. That's on the basketball side there. Other notables in sports that we haven't mentioned. We mentioned volleyball earlier. Emily Kaiser, Marion Metzkis in the mix there. Jordan Pingle is eligible next year there. Rowing, Bryson Turner, a huge development that could throw a wrinkle into the Hall of Fame situation next year.
Yes. So we, of course, over this past summer, I had the pleasure of covering the UCF athletes that were competed in the Paris Olympics. We talked to Julie Polson, who was a Hall of Famer, who I think is a Hall of Fame candidate herself, with a 2-time honorable mention All-American. Of course, she made it to the Olympics with Team Denmark. I think that she was a Hall of Fame candidate from minute 1 when her career ended, because she had a great UCF career. The big development from this Olympics is that Victoria Senkute of Lithuania all of a sudden vaulted herself into the conversation for one of the great UCF rowers of all time by finishing with a bronze medal in the single sculls at the Paris 2024 Olympics, becoming the first varsity knight is the key word here, to get an Olympic medal since Michelle Akers in 1996. There hasn't even been a UCF athlete, former UCF student, period, that has gotten an Olympic medal since Phil Dalhouser got gold in 2008. And now Victoria Senkute has all of a sudden joined that elite company of getting Olympic glory just for her home nation of Lithuania. One of the first not Americans, by the way, not American to get an Olympic gold medal that went to UCF. Senkute is in prime position. We've said it before. Afia Charles became the first track athlete to get into the Hall of Fame because of her appearance in the Olympics. Imagine what an Olympic medal is going to do for your Olympic conversation. She was not even named All-American, by the way, But she was, by the way, a multiple all-conference participant. We're not saying that she was bad while she was at UCF by any means. She was very good. She just wasn't a Hall of Fame, an All-American, which is very hard to do. Only Christina Sarf and Julie Polson, I believe, have ever done it. And so, Chelsea Lawson, I believe, did it once. So 3 people have only ever done it in program history. It's very hard to do. So Victoria Senkute didn't get All-American, but she went on her own. She rode that boat on her own in the Olympics and got a bronze medal. I think that the committee is going to see that, and I think she's going to be the next rower to get in, because 2018 was the year that she graduated, which means she's going to be eligible before Julie Polson is.
Correct. Polson is eligible in 2028. Senkute is eligible as soon as next year. That's a fascinating little wrinkle there to monitor, to see what happens there in the next year and the next couple of years. That could certainly impact that from a rowing standpoint. Men's soccer, Sean Johnson, I think should be in. He's still playing professionally, obviously, in the MLS. He's been playing. He's obviously been on the U.S. national team, had a long pro career, played at UCF as a goalkeeper. That's a name to watch there. Rick Brancevic, I mentioned earlier, is a guy who's been overlooked from the early 80s. And then 2026, Cal Jennings becomes eligible. He's currently playing for the Tampa Bay organization, which is interesting because that could throw a wrinkle, Bryson, into whether Cal Jennings gets inducted that year or not, because if he's still playing professionally at that point, he may not be available to be participate in the ceremony until he's done playing. So, but those are some names to watch on the men's soccer side. Women's soccer, we mentioned Amanda Cromwell. Marissa Diggs. Give you this stat on Marissa Diggs. Marissa Diggs is the only other UCF soccer player, along with Michelle Akers, that have been a multi-time All-American in their career.
It's amazing that she hasn't gotten in yet. She graduated in 2013. She's been eligible for a while.
Yeah, she plays the defense position, which does not provide stats, as anybody that follows soccer. But Marissa Diggs, one of their Vera Veras, goalkeepers playing professionally overseas, was an All-American goalkeeper, American Conference goalie of the year. She becomes eligible next year on the women's soccer side as well. Softball, Kaylee Novak, I think is a name to watch there. Janae Shinhoster, Coach Gillespie, we brought up as well. Softball, we'll see. I don't know what happens there. That could be a few years after a 5-year run there where softball kind of in every year, it seemed like. Women's basketball, Asia Patrick's had a really nice career there about a decade ago, is currently coaching. Zy Lewis, both are going to be eligible. Then KK Wright becomes eligible in 2027, maybe the odds-on favorite to be the next women's basketball player to get inducted at some point there down the road. We mentioned Gabe DeCamps on the men's tennis side. Then women's tennis we mentioned earlier as well with Victoria Winderharma and Monica Matias. There's some others, Rebecca Stolmar down the road. But again, we know that could be down the road there. There. So those are some of the other sports, Bryson. Any last other thoughts there?
I think when you talked about women's soccer, I feel like women's soccer is due. I think it's been a while since we've seen a women's soccer athlete get inducted into Hall of Fame. The last one was Alini Reyes in 2019. It's for how storied this UCF women's soccer program is. It's kind of insane to me that it's taken this long to induct another one.
Who would you pick? Who do you pick?
To be fair, by the way, that the committee has been addressing needs of other female women's sports programs that have been ignored for a very long time. So I think that is obviously very great, but it's been a while for women's soccer. And so I feel like next year it could be a good time, might be an interesting time to see if that maybe they'll induct one. Of course, Victoria Senkute throws a little wrench in things, but I think from a sports standpoint, I think women's soccer is due.
Who are you
picking?
Who
I think it's going to be? I think it's got to be Marissa Diggs, either her or Cromwell. I think it depends on.
It's probably, I think it's going to be, yeah.
But if it's a player, I think it's going to be Marissa Diggs, because multi-time All-American. How has she not been inducted already? So I think
a lot of great athletes. In fairness, there's been a lot of great athletes in the defensive position in soccer that does not provide stats, so it's a hard one to get a feel for that. One of the other things that I think it's hurt some of the great soccer players of recent history in UCF soccer is the bar is so high. Think about it. You got Michelle Akers.
Kim Wyant
is a bar, right? Like the Kim Wyants, that these people that are giants. Amy Ullman, who's now Amy Griffin.
maybe
These are
Joan.
so the standard is so high that I feel like times soccer gets hurt by that, which sounds bizarre.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
like it's I wonder if that plays a factor into some of that as well
Oh yeah.
when it comes to all that.
I mean, they started so good. Let's remember their first season in the NCAA. They played in the first NCAA and women's soccer championship in 1982. Like that was, I think, one of their first few seasons in existence, and they were right there at the top. But in fact, the coach the coach they coached against in that championship, Anson Dorrance of North Carolina, just retired from that position. That's how long it's been since that has happened. So I think the bar was definitely set very high from the very beginning, and so the standards are definitely high for that. But I think Marissa Diggs, I feel like she's met that standard. You know, two multi-time All-American. Only other one to do that was Michelle Akers.
I agree. I
So
agree.
it's either her or Cromwell, because Cromwell, I think, has also earned it for how long she was there and the success that she had. I think it's just a matter of
Top
what.
5, top 6 head coach in the history of the UCF athletics in any sport. I mean,
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, women's soccer. So yeah, women's soccer I think is due, and then I think next year is going to be a really great opportunity. I think
You
for.
want to make predictions for next year? You want to make predictions on record here? What do you want to do?
I think it would be nice to have some predictions, or
All right, go on. Give me your
have a
prediction. Give me
general
your
idea.
give me your
So
class.
next year, I think, is going to be an opportunity for UCF to kind of go back and address some people that may have been ignored for a while. Because once we get to 2026, that's when like the BJ Taylors and the Taco Falls become eligible. And so obviously we're going to get in, like, because once we start getting into the late 2010s of people becoming eligible, there's going to be log jams. So next year, I think, is a year where you really want to try to go back and address some people that may have been overlooked for a while. Number one, Ariel Scott. I think that it's not the same thing as Anne-Marie Blaney. I think that, she's a sprinter. Anne-Marie's a distance runner. I think they're relatively different people, and it's not like they've inducted, people from the same program in back-to-back years before. They did it in softball with Shelby Turner and Mackenzie Audis, who were both good enough to earn that. I think Anne-Marie Blaney and Ariel Scott are both good enough in that same vein to do that. So I think her. I think volleyball, I think a volleyball player is going to get in. I'm not going to say definitively on which one, because there's Pingle, Metzges, and Kaiser, I think, are the three that would be the biggest considerations. Pingle, of course, just getting eligible. I would give the odds-on favorite to her, but I think it could be any of the three.
Was an All-American, honorable mention 2018.
Yes.
Without question, the best libero ever. So, yeah.
Yes. I think a women's soccer representative gets in, whether it's Cromwell or Diggs or maybe somebody else. Vera Veras is going to become eligible, so she'll have that kind of first-time ballot look through in her favor. I think it's going to be one of those. I think it could be one of those three. So I think a women's soccer player is going to get in. As far as the football player that's going to get in, you mentioned Darren Slack. I think if it's like a Mark Giacomo, I think if it's in the style of this year, I could see Darren Slack and Mackenzie Milton potentially both getting in together. Maybe. I mean, it's in this. I think the possibility is there, but do you induct two people in the same? Because I think the only time you would see two football players of the same position being inducted, it's quarterback. I think that that's the only one that they do that with. So I think a football player is obviously going to get in, and I'm going to say it's either Darren Slack, Mackenzie Milton, or both. And then for the next one, the next two, I'm going to say Alex Haynes gets in. I feel like that. People have really been talking about it. So this is my one for the fans, because you guys have talked about, hey, why isn't Alex Haynes in? I'm going to give you guys this one. I think Alex Haynes will get in next year as part of my list. And then the non-football male athlete, I'm going to go with Ricardo Gavea, because it has been a long time since men's golf has gotten one in. And I think that with the Olympics happening recently, happening recently, I think Ricardo Gavea gets in. The only wrinkle that I would see is what do they do about Victoria Senkute? Because I think two things could happen with Victoria Senkute. Number one, she gets eligible immediately. And if she does get in next year, I think she's going to take the women's soccer spot. I think. So if Senkute gets in, I don't think a women's soccer player gets in. And then you could wait, because remember, if she's going to be inducted, she has to travel from Lithuania. That's a long trip. And so, but
it's happened before, though. I mean, Aline Reyes, just for record, did travel all the way from, I believe, I don't know. She was somewhere in Europe. She was playing European soccer at the time. She traveled all the way from there for the Hall of Fame ceremony back in 2019. So it has happened before.
All right. So, but the other idea is, remember, the Olympics are coming to the United States in 2028. So, and Senkute, given how young she is, she could come here for that. I think she could. And so, do you induct her while she's in the country for that? And so, I think as a lead up to it, or around when it happens. So, I think for me, I am in a really iffy scenario when it comes to how it's going to happen because I can't predict how the committee operates. But I think it operates. But I think Victoria Senkute, I think it's a 50-50 shot to me. I think it's really a toss-up if she gets in next year.
The Senkute situation is wild because that came out of nowhere. Because like if she doesn't win that medal, I don't even know if we're having that conversation.
Oh, yeah.
She wins a bronze, and that just happened. So does that recent memory help her get in next year, or do they wait?
I think she'll get. I think if she does get in, I think it's going to be at the expense of somebody from women's soccer. But I might be wrong on that because women's soccer.
I'll say this:
long. So
unless he is not literally available to partake in the ceremony, which he may not, and they couldn't work it out, Milton's going to be in. If he's available, which he's a lock. I don't even think that's a debate. I think there will be if he's not available because of football commitments and they just decide, hey, let's wait. I think somebody else from that I think Traquan Smith might be the guy that gets in. We'll see. I think somebody from that 17 team will get it, I think. But maybe not. I think Milton, I don't know what to make of the Milton deal because he's coaching. The ceremony's on a Friday. There's a lot of things that, is he still coaching at Tennessee? Has he moved on? And then like, it's not like he has a high profile full-time assistant job. I don't even remember what his title exactly is. But could he kind of do what Latavius Murray did a couple years ago where he was on the NFL roster? He flew in, did the ceremony, and then flew and met his team wherever they played that NFL Sunday. That's what Latavius did. In fact, I don't believe he stuck around for the football game on Saturday. Rightfully so. He has obligations. Oh, yeah. I wonder if Milton maybe does something similar where he flies in for the ceremony Friday, but then flies back to wherever Tennessee is at, if he's with Tennessee still next year on that Saturday. If they conflict, maybe it'll work out where Tennessee has a bye weekend that weekend if he's still there, and it works out perfectly. Who knows? But I would say Milton would certainly be the front runner.
All right. Anyone else on your radar to get in? You agree with me on some of my selections?
Yeah, I don't think we're that far off. I will say I do think Haynes maybe gets in. I think there'll be multiple football players. I agree with that. The Senkute thing though is such a wild card. I think that really throws. It really makes things very interesting. I'll say this: Ariel Scott should be in. I better be in. I'll say that. Okay. I think she needs to be in. I do agree with you. A volleyball player will get in. I think it's going to end up being Pingle, but we'll see. I kind of, you know what? I think Amanda Cromwell gets in. I liked your little stat you threw out there about this little streak of coaches that have been honored, right? Since 2019, right? You said O'Leary 19. What was it?
It is 4. It's like 4. It was 19, 21. They took a year off. And then it was 19, 22, 23, 24.
It's a pretty good streak. I could see Cromwell in there for women's soccer, a volleyball player like Pingle type, or the ones we've discussed. Scott, right? So that's 3. Milton, I'm just going to assume Milton is available. 4. I think that's 4. Right? Volleyball, soccer, track, Milton, 4.
You said, I think you said Haynes.
Let me look at my list. This is why committees, man, I feel for you. You got a hard job.
No, yeah, I know. We do, and we're doing this to ourselves. We are voluntarily doing this.
Yeah, I don't know why we're doing this.
It's because it's fun. That's why.
If you say so. Yeah, why not? I'll say Haynes and Milton for football. That's 2. Cromwell soccer 3. I'll say Pingle 4. But I mean, I'm cool with it if it's Kaiser or Metzgets. I'm not gonna,
Volleyball.
Scott 5.
I think the only one who do you put in 6 if they're at 6 if they're doing 6?
Man, we don't know that, and we don't know if they're adding categories,
Yeah.
not adding categories. So let's give us some grace on that.
Yeah, let's just say that they do 6 again. We're assuming they do 6 again. We assume consistency.
I'm gonna go Cootie. You got to go with the bronze medalist.
Okay. So this is interesting. So this is the interesting bit then, Eric. So you're predicting that it's going to be.
I don't know anything, by the way. This is just me throwing things up in the air. I don't have any information. I don't know anything. I'm looking at the list that I wrote on blackandgoldbanneret.com, and certainly you can make cases for other people. You mentioned Gobea. You mentioned Gobea. What about somebody like Greg Eason, for example? I think should be considered there as well.
The Olympics. That brings up a good point. What if you put Gouveia and Senkute in together for an Olympics thing?
I would be surprised. I think you'll have multiple football, but maybe they could do that. You're right. They could do that.
That's interesting with your selection because your little selection is a majority female class, which is a rare occurrence for the.
Did happen though, didn't it? I believe it happened last year's class. I believe it was.
Yeah, I believe it has. It's not often, but it happens.
Yeah,
sure. And it happens. And then you also did not have a non-football male athlete getting, because usually they do that. They put in a non-football.
Right. No, I agree. I agree. That's why I'm hesitant.
That's Chris Duffy this year. Last year was Kyle Bono. In 2020, in 2022, you could say in 2022 they didn't do it in 22.
Right. It's not a lot.
Interesting. Which is
the other things we don't know. There's a lot of stuff we don't know as we do this. What if Sean Johnson, for example, decides to retire after this year?
Yeah,
that changes everything to me. In my opinion, you got to put him in my view. So there's a lot of unknowns that we don't know. And you know what that sound was? The buzzer, which means we're out of time. That's my way of getting out of this conversation. Hey, this was a blast. Definitely didn't expect to go 2 hours. So, Bryson, whatever obligations you had, I apologize in advance if you missed them. But I hope everybody enjoyed this banter. It's always a good tradition. We will have more coverage on the Hall of Fame class this year. Leading up to that ceremony, November 1st, we hope to have some of the Hall of Famers of that class for some interviews here in the next couple of months, some content, look for some articles leading up to that as well, which is such a special event, an awesome event. If you want to go to UCFKnights.com, get all the details there. Credit to everybody. November 1st, that's the ceremony. Friday night, November 1st, with the football game, Arizona. Class will be honored November 2nd. It should be always special. I've been to many of those Hall of Fame events. It's a special deal. You will not be disappointed. And the folks that have been working on it now over the last couple of years have been phenomenal when it comes to that event. So you will definitely be appreciative of that. And like I said, Bryson, this is always a blast. Always enjoyed talking. We'll have more on this in the next couple of months. But
this is our reaction.
That's our reaction show to the 2024 UCF Athletic Hall of Fame class. And your comments there. And we will certainly address them down the road as well. But we're out of time. Bryson's got things to do. We got things to do. Keep it on blackandgoldbanneret.com for all the latest in UCF athletics. Of course, UCF men football, Big 12 opener at TCU. We will have a night shift after the game. Kyle Nash will be there. I may or may not be there. We'll see how long that game goes. Should be a cast of thousands. Obviously, women's soccer underway in Big 12 play as well. Men's soccer, top 10 somehow. Men's Vikings, they will be getting ready for Sunbelt soon. Cross country gets going. Fall ball and baseball will be in October. Softball gets going. Basketball. It's all going to get busier. And you want to keep it on blackandgoldbanneret.com for all the latest there, as well as on our YouTube channel for our videos, post-game interviews, and shows like this, and as well as in our podcast feeds for our Night Shift podcast episodes. And much, much more. So for Bryson Turner, I'm Eric Lopez. We hope you've enjoyed this edition of Night Shift.